And now I'd love to pass it off to our alumni for introductions before getting started with our panel questions. So I will pass it off to Eugeas for starting with our introductions. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Eugeas Ding, and I graduated Northwestern in 2014 with a Bachelor's of Arts in Biology, a concentration in genetics and molecular biology, which I think has shifted a little bit since I graduated. And then I also was a student in the IBIS PhD program, where I actually decided to master out of that. So I did get my Master's of Science from Northwestern in 2017. I taught a little bit at the City Colleges of Chicago, kind of in the beginning of 2018, looking for just, different biotype jobs. And I actually found one out in Irvine, California, so Southern California. And that's when I moved to California in the middle of 2018. After a short stint in biotech, I realized I wanted to stay in education. I had tutored for Northwestern athletics, been just a tutor my whole life, and then taught in the community college, and really wanted to go pursue that route. So I went back to school, got my California teaching credential, my Master's of Arts in Education, taught in Los Angeles Unified, starting in 2020, taught through the pandemic. Was LAUSD Rookie of the Year this past school year, so 2020, 2021. And then in the summer, decided to pick up and move out to Texas, where I am right now, and I teach dual credit biology. So basically college biology to high school students, and I also teach at the local community college as well as an adjunct professor, so kind of started in research. We can talk about more how I apply that research to my classroom. And currently I'm working on my doctorate of education and educational leadership and management to bring more awareness to underrepresented and marginalized groups to STEM due to different experiences I've had being someone with a disability that may not be visible to most. So really pursuing that passion and trying to open up doors for individuals who are underrepresented and marginalized in STEM.
Great, thanks, Eugeas. And I'll pass it off to Liz next.
Hi, everyone. Liz McMath. I graduated Northwestern in 2009, also like Eugeas, with a degree in biological sciences, concentration in genetics and molecular biology. And while I was at Northwestern, I conducted research in the lab.
And Liz, sorry to interrupt you. You're a little quiet. I hope it's just me, but if you get a little closer to the
screen. Is that better?
That's perfect.
Okay, got it. Sorry about that. So Liz McMath, I graduated. Did you hear that part? Or just repeat? I'll just repeat it.
Yeah, repeat. That sounds great. Thank you.
So I graduated Northwestern in 2009, degree in biological sciences, concentration in genetics and molecular bio. While I was at Northwestern from my sophomore through, summer after senior year, I conducted research in the lab of Carol Laban, got very interested in developmental biology. And so I followed that passion for research to do my PhD in genetics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I was there and through 2014 when I defended my thesis, and then 5 days later started a job for a small boutique consulting firm here in Chicago. It's called BioStrategies Group, about 20 people, really doing strategy consulting that focused in the pharma space. So work for big pharma, little pharma, Wall Street, private equity, answering questions about what investment decisions should a pharmaceutical company make, how should they prioritize their business development spend, what drugs should they go after, and it all came down to financial modeling. So conducting market research and understanding how different drugs were going to get used. So we helped them make decisions. I started as an analyst. I left as a managing consultant, starting to sell my own projects. I was there 5.5 years. And then while I was there, I had my first child, and it was great. I could balance it, but I just had gotten to a point in consulting where I felt like to be a better consultant, I needed to understand the client side. And so an opportunity came up in the Chicago area, which is where my family is based. And I moved to Avexis, which is a gene therapy company. It was purchased by Novartis before I started. So I was joining like already a division of Novartis, but it was kind of a standalone biotech, or so Novartis was leaving it. But since I joined there in September of 2019, we've now been fully integrated in Novartis. And so I joined in kind of a hybrid strategy business development role. And at startups or biotechs, it was a quickly growing company, and I didn't really have a fleshed out role. But as this company has gotten more integrated into Novartis, I have a fleshed out role. And I now lead search and evaluation for Novartis, focused in the gene therapy space. And what that means is I'm responsible for going out and identifying and evaluating assets to bring into our pipeline. And so I do that, the scientific, clinical, and commercial evaluations myself. And if I like them, I bring them to a small team and I guide that team to evaluate them. And then if we like it, we go to a bigger team, and eventually we build up detailed business cases to present to management that would say either we should go do this deal or we should go acquire this company. And so Novartis is based in Switzerland, but because of the work from home aspects, and because Novartis Gene Therapies, formerly Avexis, is still based in the Chicago area, I'm able to work from home despite that. So that's me.
Great, thank you so much, Liz. And Amy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Harrington, and I have a little bit more of a convoluted in my mind trajectory, because I still feel like I'm working on it every day, if I'm being completely honest. So I graduated in 2011 and also a bio major. It was neurobio and global health. And so that was the global health actually originally started off as just like a side interest. I wasn't planning to do anything with that. And it really ultimately led me, I think, to where I am now. And so after graduating, I thought I was going to do med school, like a lot of you probably, and ended up doing my master's in medical sciences up in Boston. After doing that and ultimately not getting into med school, I ended up in Chicago, back in Chicago, doing clinical research with at the medical school, doing kind of translational research, not so much any bench or really like biomolecular type work. It was very different, the whole world of clinical research to me, and very much more interesting than I ever found my lab work in undergrad. And so I really loved working with patients. I still thought maybe medicine was for me. And then kind of fell into the world of community health, which is where I still am. I work for a company called Alliance Chicago, and we are a network of federally qualified community health centers, mostly based in Chicago, but really we have health centers across the country, literally from like Alaska to Florida, Hawaii, everywhere. I didn't know at the time what a federally qualified health center was or how it functioned or what it looked like. But over the past couple of years, my role within the company has kind of changed a lot as I have moved and kind of been remote as well. And so, I currently work with health centers in optimizing and implementing new health technologies, as well as work in primarily like a healthcare operations space at the community health level.
Great, thanks, Amy. And that was great hearing a little bit more about the rundown of your paths, since graduating. I'd really love to first dive into the student experience. And if you can talk about some of the impactful classes or internships or lab experience, things like that, that kind of helped guide you into, your first role after college. So Amy, why don't we get started with you about that student experience?
Yeah, sounds great. So I kind of just touched on this, but I think global health was really it was huge in my experience. I was really interested in community health and global health, kind of neglected tropical diseases, all the weird, interesting things like that. And kind of saw myself, I did the public health in China program when I was at Northwestern, and it really opened my eyes to a lot of things that I didn't necessarily get within the biology degree itself or biology classes, but it was still science, it was still medicine, and it really kind of piqued my interest. And over time, I added more and more classes around global health, and then ultimately thought, wow, there is so, global is great, but there is so much happening just within my own community and any community that I ended up kind of working in or volunteering in. And so that's how I landed in public health and community health. And then I would say that, that being kind of the most formative, but as far as other interesting classes or things that I kind of learned, I really think my favorite classes at Northwestern were really not, honestly, the bio classes, if I'm being completely honest. I really loved, like classes like Russian Lit, which now I see, I love reading now, and I kind of lost that through my time in college on I never read for fun, and that was kind of like one of the opportunities to do so and kind of take a class that spoke to that side of me that I didn't really tap into so much. So classes like that, or I love like earth and planetary sciences. That was a fun one that I kind of took as a I don't want to say blow off class. Are we allowed to say that? But it ended up being kind of really challenging and totally different than anything I did with the bio degree or any pre-med classes. So I would say those kind of are the ones that stick out to me in my experience, and not actually the ones that I think I spent the most time in.
Yeah, that's great, Amy. Thank you. It's fun to hear the authentic insights from your student experience. So you can share whatever you want on this panel, and we appreciate it. And so that's great to hear some of those classes outside of your major that were interesting. And Amy, did you say this? Did you minor in global health studies?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome, thank you. And Liz, what about you with your student experience?
So it's hard. It was a while ago that I took these classes, but I think there were two that stood out to me that helped prepare me for graduate school, but also for, the type of work that I do now, like interrogating the science. And I think it was Dr. Galbraith. I think that was, I don't know if he's still there, but I'm pretty sure that was his name. He ran a class called molecular genetics, which was like a really high level, I think it was like 390 or something. It was a long time ago. But what he did, you would read scientific papers and you would really interrogate what did this experiment really show and what new knowledge came into being and how was it built on top of each other. And it is like, that's the way you need to think when you're a scientist. So many biology classes are, memorize this and memorize that. And it actually, I was pre-med early on, like freshman year and early sophomore year. And I started to realize, like, as I took more biology classes, how one thing I was learning in one class, tied into something I was learning in another class. And I would sit at these study groups with my friends and I would say, guys, like, isn't this really cool? Like, how did this new knowledge come into being? Like, do you think these experiments, like from biochem, might have like connected to these experiments in molecular biology or anyway, like I just wanted to understand, how did we learn what we learned? And everyone was like, you don't need to know that for the test. And I was like, that is not the point here, people. And that was when I realized, like, I'm not thinking like a pre-med, I'm thinking more like a scientist. And so for a while I had thought about going MD, PhD, looked into that route, but I really liked thinking about bringing new knowledge into being. And like that got me motivated. And honestly, that carried out throughout my career in consulting, because you do that in consulting too. And so I like Galbraith's class because, yeah, it taught me how to interrogate experiments, to think about what experiments I would want to do. And that's what you do in graduate school. And he really taught you like some of the foundational papers of genetics. So it was also, you know, harder. Many of the classes that were just memorization were like pretty easy for me. But that one was like more challenging, which I liked. And so there was that class. And I also liked developmental biology, which Dr. Laban taught. She was my mentor, but also in that class, it was a lot of the foundational like embryology work and the experiments, like how do we know what we know? And so I like that aspect. But other things about undergraduate that like helped me get to where I am. I mean, I was on the sailing team. I was in a sorority. I had networks. I was in Willard and on their like res board and everything. Like I was the academic chair. That's what it was. I had the test files, if anyone knows about that. Maybe you don't do that anymore, but it was a big thing. And so honestly, the way I got into consulting and like knew about consulting, most of my classmates at Wisconsin had no idea what it was, but like, because I had the Northwestern network and like all my friends on the sailing team went into investment banking or consulting. And so I knew about that. I knew what it was going to take to get a job in that space. And building the networks was just like essential. So make sure you build those friendships. Like you will be amazed at where your colleagues end up. One of my sorority sisters sold her company, and she was younger than me. It was actually my pledge daughter, sold her company that she developed coming out of business school. And I just saw that she bought a $4.5 million house. I was just like, that was my pledge daughter. And another one of my sorority sisters, you know, worked at Uber in the early days and cashed out of that and now is like an angel investor. And so like, you never know where these people are going to end up in 10 years. So like, keep up your networks, meet people. It is not a waste of time to, you know, I know you should be studying, but you should also be doing other things because you're paying all of this money to build the network. So sailing team for me was like my Northwestern experience. Also, I like the research, I like the knowledge, but I'd say that's the most important thing to get out. That will help you as you think through your next steps in your career.
Yeah, I love that, Liz. And I love hearing you kind of talk more about your Northwestern network as peers, because I feel like so often you think of networking and meeting people outside and like going to these events, whereas like a lot of the time, the network that is going to be most helpful to you are your peers and your friends and people who are in these student groups with you that you don't think like you're networking with them, but like building those friendships and those social relationships, that is your network down the road. So I love hearing you talk more about that. That's really helpful for students who are just starting to think like, what is networking? What do you mean by my Northwestern network and things? So that's really great. And Eugea, I'd love to hear more about your student experience. I know you spent, you know, more time on campus, so go ahead.
Yeah, of course. So just to touch on what Liz was saying, that class, I think it was 395, molecular genetics. Dr. Galbraith is still there. He was actually my academic advisor, but he did not teach it. He moved into like administrative roles. And so it was actually Professor Gaber, who is a professor emeritus. And Professor Gaber was one of the most amazing professors that I've ever had.
That's who it was. It was Gaber, not Galbraith. Okay. Thank you. Rick Gaber. I forgot. Yes. Thank you.
Yes. So he was amazing. Loved his class. Like Liz, like it pushed you and challenged you to really think outside the box. Cause like Liz was saying, my classmates were like, I don't need that for the MCAT. I'm good. Like it doesn't apply to me type of thing. And I was like, hold on. But these concepts we're learning about like the different pathways of like development or like the different enzymes and things like that, like they were all applicable to what I was doing in my research lab. And so I really love, like, that was probably one of the hardest classes I've taken, but it really pushed me. And I think I still have all those papers saved in my apartment, like in a box somewhere that's moved with me from place to place. But other than that, I think Professor Sadie Wignall's Cell Biology 315 was also another class that really hooked me on this idea of cell molecular biology. I don't think I mentioned it, but I actually transferred from UCLA after 2 years at UCLA. So I kind of dove headfirst into these upper division classes that, you know, I had all my transfer credits was like, just hit the ground running. So unlike Liz and Amy, I don't think I had as much undergraduate experience in the sense that I jumped in as a junior. But what really stood out to me was actually the research opportunity at Northwestern. And that's why I pushed to transfer. jumping in as a junior to do undergraduate research is really difficult, as some of you may know, because the professors will tell you, you need 2-3 years to publish a paper to get research done. And I was like, well, I'm up for that challenge. So I actually joined Dr. Ishwar Radhakrishnan's lab in Cook, I think like the 4th floor of Cook. And he took me on, and he was very frank with me. The first day I met with him after I got onto campus that fall of junior year, he was like, I don't know what you're going to do because you don't have much time. It takes, you know, a quarter to get acclimated to the lab, and then a quarter of that independent, you know, the 3, whatever the class is, just independent research. And then, you know, that's 2 quarters pretty much wasted of not doing a project. And then you can't really start your independent research project till essentially spring of junior year for me. And so I just dove right in, and I was like, you know what, I'm up for the challenge. So for me, I actually put my focus into research. And after, I guess about only a year of really focused research, I stayed all summer, got this summer undergraduate research grant to fund my research on campus. I worked probably 12 hours a day in that lab because I was fortunate enough to have most of my coursework done. You know, all those prereqs, all those humanities classes I transferred over. So I really was taking very minimal classes. And one of those classes was research. And so I really threw myself into it, and I got my honors thesis, was awarded the Irving M. Klotz Prize, basic prize in undergraduate research in 2014. And ended up, the work that I did for my senior thesis was actually published in a PNAS paper, a greater paper, you know, bigger scope of the lab. But really that experience really solidified, like, maybe this is what I want to do. Maybe I want to go into research and really, really solidify myself as a scientist in the field. And then some things happened in grad school where I was like, no, this is not quite, like, I don't want to teach at the college level. I kind of wanted to teach at a lower level, like community college or high school. And I didn't really want to run a research lab. I wanted to research, but not run the lab. So I kind of was like, you know, I didn't really know what pathways I could take with that PhD. And that's part of the reason why I want to give back, because it's like nobody told me all these different pathways of consulting or, you know, things like that. I wasn't aware of it when I started the IBIS program at Northwestern. So things happened. I mastered out, finished my master's thesis, mastered out. And then, so that was really what, so, you know, the experiences that I had. And as a grad student, I actually was part of the Northwestern athletics tutoring program. Which some of my closest friends were athletes, and because I tutor them, you know, I keep in touch with them to this day. But that really showed me, like, I want to teach. I actually spent more time in the mentorship opportunities for research. I forget the acronym. It's called MORE. It's more a graduate program, but basically mentoring high school students at Evanston Township. So really mentoring, teaching, and you know, I was a graduate TA. You know, in grad school, I did. I forget that under, like, GSW, I think is what it's called now, the Gateway Science Workshop. I was a mentor, like a tutor there. So really those experiences out of the classroom really taught me, like, this is what I want to do. And kind of, you know, roundabout way ended up back in the classroom.
I love that. Yeah, I appreciate all of you sharing some of the classes that you remember, but then also these other experiences that, you know, helped you, guide you to the career paths you all are on. And, you know, I'd love to dive into the first job out of school. And I know some of you, you know, went to, you know, did further education before getting a first job out of school. But, you know, so many of our students, especially right now in winter quarter, are really trying to examine, like, what is my job after college, or internships to set up for the job. You know, it's a stressful time. And I know a lot of students feel the pressure to, like, land that perfect job. So I'd love to hear your perspective about the jobs you landed after school and how you navigated, you know, your career path from there. So Eugeas, let's start with you. About your role directly after school.
Yeah, definitely. So right after I got, obviously, you know, I got my bachelor's, went straight into grad school. And then once I got my master's, I started looking for biotech jobs. And I think Liz mentioned this earlier before the students hopped on. It's hard to get a biotech job in the Chicagoland area. It's really hard. And I was a research scientist, so I wanted, you know, that hands-on lab work. I didn't want to sit and analyze data. I wanted to do the experiments. And I had such difficulty. I mean, I went through recruiting firms. I went through company websites. It just couldn't land that job. So I picked up the job at the City Colleges of Chicago teaching biology, you know, as an adjunct, just for the time being until I could land a job. Ended up landing that job in Southern California. So I moved for that position. That did not end the way I thought it would. Not only was there was legal aspects to it in terms of having a disability, right? That's a whole nother conversation. Also fuels my passion for the doctorate work I'm doing. But the job wasn't there. I was trying to speak up and be like, hey, I have this experience in like protein biology, like protein purification, like, and the company wanted to develop some of that stuff. And I was like, well, I have this research, I have this background. And they didn't want to listen. They were like, okay, well, you're just going to go pipette 100 times a day, 1,000 times a day, and do the same thing over and over. And I was like, well, then why do I have this master's? Like a robot could do this. If I'm being super frank, maybe it was just that one company, right? And maybe because it was a youthful company, kind of not startup, but, you know, only 10, 15 years kind of developing products. And they're like, we just want you to test things. And I was actually really appalled, I'll be honest. Coming from Northwestern, being a safety officer in my graduate lab, knowing documentation properties, proper lab technique. I saw what they did. Nobody documented anything. There was no data keeping. Yeah, I mean, it was terrible. I could see Liz's face. Like it was so bad. And I was like, I have to get out because I can't put my name to this. I can't put my degree to this. There's no documentation. There's nothing. I actually have friends who are at the company still, and 2-3 years after I left, they were like, your notebook is still our example. I was like, because you all didn't do it properly. Like, you know, they didn't document anything. And it obviously made my job harder. And so because of that, and, you know, the legal aspects, I left that, just did side jobs here and there, started teaching at community college, again, in California, just, you know, where I could. And then that's when I decided, you know what, I want to stay in teaching. I want to stay in education. My high school teachers were really supportive of me. They actually thought I would be a teacher, and were surprised I went a different path. And so went back into school for that, and then, you know, landed the teaching job. As it is, obviously there's downsides to being a teacher. But, you know, overall, I think it's pretty satisfying. Like I said, now that I teach the college level biology, we are just learning about osmosis and dialysis. And I was like, well, this is my research. Here's my paper. These are the experiments I did. And it kind of, you know, put that real world experience to these kids of like, this is what you need to know. If you want to be a scientist, right? If you want to go into medical school, you need that research background, right? If you want to do public health or whatever it is, you still need to know those research skills, right? How do you do public health research versus bench research, and sharing those experiences with them and really trying to connect them, and trying to do things from an educator point of view, having the tumultuous experience that I have. So trying to combine all those pieces together. So that's kind of where I am now. I'm, I guess, in my second career, if you want to take biotech as the first career, right? Teaching as a second career, and really looking to try to leave some kind of legacy impact in the field of education, especially advocacy for marginalized and underrepresented groups in STEM.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Eugeas, hearing how a first job didn't go as planned and how disappointed you were, but then how this led you to now a career path that you're really passionate about and excited about. So I think it's so valuable. So I really appreciate you sharing that, you know, with our students who, you know, the first job isn't always beautiful and glorious and everything you wanted it to be. So thank you. And Liz, would love to pass it off to you for your first job.
Yeah, so I will refer to the job I got coming out of graduate school really as my first job. And so that was as a senior analyst at a company called BioStrategies Group. I think, as I mentioned before, about 20-person company in Chicago. And for me, I really wanted a job right after graduation, and consulting hires in cycles. And at least when I was in it, they did. So if you wanted to go to like the big firms, you know, you had to catch the right cycle. And so you'd have to interview in the summer, and then you'd submit your application in the summer, and you would then interview in fall, and you get a spot for the following summer. And I missed that sort of cycle, because in graduate school, you know, never fully know like when you're going to be able to graduate, and things were coming together and everything. So I missed some of that cycle. And so I was left with kind of fewer options for companies that were hiring off cycle. And I got really down as I was like in November, December, when I was trying to find an interview for jobs, thinking, okay, I can graduate in spring. And, you know, BioStrategies Group was a company where I kind of just dropped my resume, and they ended up calling me back, and I went through the interview process really quickly. And they normally wanted to hire people right away, but they were willing to wait for me to graduate in May. But so that job was an analyst, or senior analyst. they had never hired PhDs before, and they didn't really know what to do with me, but I kind of convinced them. Now it's very common for consulting firms to hire PhDs. There's been a turn in how they think about it. But when I joined that company, there were no consultants and like no managers. They had since left. And so the company was really in a contracted phase because they don't hire in normal cycles. They kind of hire just in time. And it was a single owner company and, you know, small, somewhat disorganized. But so I was kind of thrown into the deep end. There was no training, and it was a very steep learning curve. But at the same time, I had so much opportunity. And so the partners would essentially give me a project and say, this is what we need to solve for. This is what the client wants to know. And I had to go figure it out and how I was going to do it. They give me a few examples and, you know, thinking it through. And it was great because I didn't have to stay in my box. It wasn't just, you are an analyst, you do this type of work, the consultant does this work, the manager does this work, the partner does this work. It was, I could take on as much as I was capable, and I could go through the ranks and get promoted quickly, or like I was doing consultant level work within a few months of being there. I was managing projects within, managing clients within my first couple of years. But at first, you know, it didn't look like that great of a job. It wasn't a fancy consulting firm. There wasn't a training program. But I wouldn't give it up, because when you're learning, you know, somebody can tell you to do something a certain way, and then you do it that way because they told you, or you can essentially trial and error and figure it out yourself. What is the best way to do it? And then, you know, like you understand it. You don't just do it that certain way. You understand the components and the rationale and the reasons, and it's much easier to teach people. And so I think I got a much better educational experience from coming up through those ranks. And you know, I was able to get a job at like a really competitive biotech, now part of Novartis. Like, it's not like coming out of a no-name, somewhat consulting firm, as bad as that is. So my advice is, you know, don't wait for the perfect job. Like, or at least for me, it was not to wait for a perfect job. Take what you can and learn from it, make the best of it. Learn what you like, what you don't like, gain new skills, build your network, and then move on from there. Because I mean, if I wanted to go to McKinsey or LEK or something, I could potentially get there. They do experienced hires, because it's all about the accomplishments that you have. Well, take what you're given and be able to turn it into something. And so I would say, you know, how can you be successful in a highly ambiguous situation, like going into being an analyst without any managers, without knowing what to do? And it's really, you need to be intrinsically motivated. So like the same things that get you there to Northwestern are going to be the things that help you in your career. And it can't just be about like, I want to collect a paycheck. Money can be a motivator in like a short term, but eventually you'll have like soul searching, like what is the purpose of my life and what am I doing? And so finding something that you can be intellectually stimulated by, and having aspects of that of the job can be important too, because you never know where it's going to get you, but you have to be able to show people, look, I can accomplish things, I can get stuff done. So start building that track record sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Liz, thank you so much for sharing too, just like how that felt when you were in your search and you felt a little bit behind, because I feel like, you know, I'm sure there are students on the call today who are feeling that way. And like you said, take advantage of the opportunities and learn and grow, and really appreciate you sharing, you know, just a little bit more about like how it really felt in that process of searching. And it seemed like it clearly worked out really well for you. So yeah, thank you. And Amy, would love to hear about your first role.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, I just want to kind of comment on something that Liz said, which don't wait for your perfect job. And I think that is so true. I think even if you get your so-called perfect job, I mean, I don't think there is such thing the way that you are thinking about it right now. I think that all jobs have aspects that you're not going to like. And it's really about finding out what that is, and kind of like Liz was basically saying, like, you need to be the one to transform that into what you ultimately want, and how get yourself somewhere that you're happy with, because no job is going to do that for you, and no job is going to be the perfect role. So making that job work for you is really, really crucial. And I think both Eugeas and Liz did a really great job kind of talking about like their specifics. And I feel like my almost advice or my thoughts around this are more broad. So I think when I hear this question, I think two things. One, the first job after undergrad, or first job, like real world job in general, I think that comes inherently with its own set of learnings, no matter what that job is, which field it's in. I think there's skills to be developed, a level of professionalism that you previously have not encountered before that you'll need to learn. Just interacting with humans that are not your peers. Like, it's a weird thing, but just interacting with people who are not like you, who have come from different walks of life, have different experiences, and yet either are on now your same playing field, or you're maybe even managing them coming out of Northwestern. Like, there are different relationships to manage, and learning kind of how to handle yourself in these professional settings, I think comes with just like being in a first job, period. And I think that Eugeas mentioned this as well, a first job not being like what you expect it to be, and kind of finding out that, hey, a job is what this company or business or school or professor needs at any given time. It is not made for you. It is what you're kind of fitting a role that somebody else needs. Somebody has created this job because there's a gap. And so it's not personal. It's really about that company's needs, and not necessarily about you. And so I think, these two things, like expectation versus reality, and that a job at the end of the day is a job, and you aligning those expectations versus the reality is going to be really important, and to kind of not take it so personally. But I think as far as my first job, I would say my first job and my first paid job were two different things. So I had an internship with the Chicago Department of Health and Human Services my last quarter of undergrad into the summer and fall, which was really, I think, important for me. I had the luxury of doing it unpaid. It was, I know a lot of people do not have that, and I have a lot of thoughts on unpaid internships, but another day. And that really kind of helped me understand the world of health policy. And, honestly, I had never even thought about like what an office job in the public health space even looked like. So kind of that aspect of showing me what it could look like day to day, I think was really translational to me now. And then secondly, my first paid job would be clinical research. And it was a job as well that kind of told me exactly what I needed to do. But I think the important thing there was that there was a little bit of room for growth and independence and ability to take that role and kind of become a manager of different coordinators, and kind of have a little bit of say on some projects as well. And then that really introduced me to the field of translational research. So, I had only really known the bio side of things, where, you're really in a laboratory, you're doing all the pipettes, like all that stuff, what I experienced in undergrad. But the research where you take what all those amazing people have done, and how do you get that from bench to bedside, and what does that mean? And that to me was like a whole new world of, this is actually really hard. It takes way too many years for that evidence to turn to practice. And how do we make that happen? How do we facilitate it? What that looks like. So.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. I really find, your points early on very interesting around professionalism in the workplace too, because it's been a topic of conversation on campus just around how, most of the internships in the last year or two have been virtual, and, learning what it's like in an office space with non-peers and things like that. And the professional arena has been, students have had to think creatively about how to gain those skills and think through what that means for post-grad. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And my next question for you is, I'm going to jump around a little bit, and I want to hear from you all just how your broad arts and sciences background has helped you in your work. I know you all are in STEM and in various aspects with science, but I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how like the Weinberg interdisciplinary degree helps you. And Amy, I'd love to start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think that as, I think that the interdisciplinary aspect of it was super translational for public health and my current career, because I think if you're not in a traditional role, like if you're not in academia or not in like a prescribed kind of a more, I would say, a prescribed path, if I can put it that way, everything becomes interdisciplinary. So, in my current role, I think writing is super important, being able to construct your thoughts in a cohesive way, in a way that makes sense, and not just makes sense to you, but to people who don't have a science background, who maybe, don't understand the concepts the way that you do, being able to present yourself in different ways, and kind of just, so writing, and I think being able to talk to people with different backgrounds, really, and know that the breadth of what you're experiencing and what you have learned at Northwestern is really indicative of what you'll see out in the world, because, science is so niche. It's so insular too. I think you'll find, at least in public health, specifically Chicago public health, you run into the same people over and over and over again. And I think that's probably true in many disciplines. And so I think when you have this kind of breadth of background in this arts and sciences degree, I think you're exposed to just so much more than and the opportunities there, and what you can speak to, and what you've just like vaguely know about but don't know a lot about, but could carry on a conversation about, is just is huge.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Amy. And Liz, curious from your perspective in, genetics, but in a business development role.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been away from undergrad for a long time. So I guess 2 points I'll make that are like potentially an extension or tangentially related, but communication is very important. Always being able to say what you mean more clearly, both in a written form and verbally. And as I think cross-functionally, or as you're saying, more liberal arts background, there are some people I work with who have such a command of language. It feels like I'm reading a book, and I'm always like, okay, how can I incorporate more SAT words into what I say, type thing. And I mean, I also do read a lot for pleasure, but there are just like some people who really can impress you for how they can communicate. And I think that can come from the liberal arts education. So reading, writing, emails are a very, very important form of communication. I can sometimes take an hour to write an email. And it's worth it because it's effective, and it doesn't waste people's time in some ways like a meeting might. But this moves me into my other aspect about interpersonal relationships at work, managing people, and really the empathy I think that Amy talked about, because you have to, when you're working, so I work with a lot of senior leaders and managing up, and everybody has different motivations for what they're trying to do, particularly when you come from all different roles. So people coming from drug development versus coming from manufacturing versus coming from finance, and they all have to contribute to some of the decisions that I am shepherding through the process. And so I need to be able to put myself in their shoes and understand what they're solving for. But it's also very important to be able to recognize sensitivities, like where there might be, we say, antibodies to certain ideas. And so the different perspectives and recognizing that these individuals come from different backgrounds or have these different perspectives is really important. And I think, yeah, reading literature or anthropology classes or aspects about that can help you work through that. Also, I think it just takes practice too. So.
Yeah, absolutely, Liz. You gain some of that from undergrad, but then as you're in the world, you're building off it and getting better and better. That's great. And Eugeas, would love to hear your perspective on how you use the broad degree.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely echoing what Amy and Liz said, kind of you learn as you go on the job, especially science communication is so difficult. Just the high level academic language, how do you communicate it? I think as a teacher, I struggle with that every day, right? Here's an antibody. Well, what is that? Like, how do I explain that to a level that high school students can grasp? And not only that, like in my role, I'm at a very new high school. We don't even have a graduating class yet. And so I work with the juniors who are our first graduating class. And in that role, for example, fighting for them, right? Creating an internship program, for example, like the one of the many projects I'm working on, right? Creating that internship program. Well, how do I put it into words? How do I effectively communicate to my principal, to my admin? This is important for our juniors, right? Knowing how to communicate. Like Liz said, that email can take hours to write. I mean, email, I'm a firm believer emails are more effective than a meeting at times, because I can't tell you how many meetings I sit in that I'm like, you could have told me in a 5-minute email and saved me an hour of time, right? Another discussion for another day, but just those little things. Yeah, just those little things. And going into education, right? Doing my doctorate, I read a lot of educational research, a lot of psychology research, and knowing how to understand those terminologies, because that's different than science, right? I have a science background. I read science papers all the time. And then, knowing how to communicate and teach that to my students, right? How do I tell them this is important? I can't tell you how many kids I have who can't write a proper email, who can't send a proper message on like a messaging forum. And we're talking 17, 18-year-olds who are going into the world, who want to be business leaders, who can't communicate with you, who don't know how to use their words, who don't know what it means to be effective, to be proper. I mean, the number of times I sat down with a kid to be like, how do you email your professor? And they're like, hi, professor. I'm like, some of them want to be like, hi, John. And I'm like, no, you can't call your professor by your first name. Like, there has to be a formality. They don't understand that. So having that liberal arts background, having taken some of the reading classes, obviously for me, like I said earlier, I transferred a lot of my credits, right? But still having some of that background and knowledge, I think it's critical no matter where we go. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Those small things that you don't realize until you see it done a different way. And you're like, oh my goodness, that way of communication is so valuable. Yeah, that's great. And thank you all so much for answering, some of our prepared questions. Students on the call, I'd love to have you continue to send in any questions that you may have for our alumni speakers. So feel free to do so through the private chat if you want me to ask it, or through the public chat if you want to turn on your microphone and ask a question. But to get us started, I know some of you mentioned being pre-med. And, for our students who are on the call today who are either pre-med or considering pivoting while in college, how did you talk to your family and your loved ones about this switch? Because I know it can be so, emotional to be planning one thing and everyone thinking you're planning one thing, and then, talking to your loved ones about that change. So, would love to throw it to the panel. Whoever wants to answer, we can go through the line, but yeah, Liz, go ahead.
So, I didn't have, like, my parents were, of course, they were very much like, whatever you want to do. Like, I was never really locked into anything. But one of the big things for me, like, you have to pay for med school and it's expensive. For grad school, you get paid to go to graduate school. And for an MD, PhD, you know, which was one of the things that I was looking at too, like that is fully paid for, you get a stipend. And so I think in the world we live in, and it's very important to consider the investment and the potential return. Because there are so many people who go to medical school with a bunch of debt and they come out with a bunch of debt. It takes a while to work that down. And whereas, you know, you come out with a PhD and you can do a lot of things. And I mean, you can't be a practicing physician, but like I work with so many physicians who like left medicine and now and they go into consulting, they go into pharma. And so like thinking what you want out of life. At the same time, I will say, I contemplate like, well, maybe I'll go back to med school, you know, like maybe I'll make that pivot or something, like, because there are aspects about like the human interactions where I'm just like, maybe I would like that. But also having been through the time that I've lived in with the ACA and all of the changes, like, this is just my view, but I think a lot of people put up like, go be a physician because you're going to make a lot of money type thing. And so I would say don't do it for financial reasons. Because when I look at the returns on that, there are other ways to get there. And I just think debt, like thinking about debt versus making money in your 20s, putting it in the bank so you can like start to save for retirement, like you have much more freedom down the road about the types of choices you want to make. So, I mean, telling my parents, hey, I'm going to get paid to go to grad school. You don't have to pay, or we don't have to take out loans. Like that was a pretty easy conversation.
I love that, Liz. And I saw lots of nods from our other panelists. So yeah. We do it.
Please, for the love of God, do not go into medicine to make money, because sure, I mean, there are some like doctors, if you're willing to live in like the most rural place, you could make like $1 million or $2 after being in debt for 8 years. But I mean, yeah, I think most people, that's probably like some added bonus in their mind, but I think I've seen it now firsthand. Like, yeah, same with Liz. Like I had so many friends go into med school and are still in debt. Like they can't buy a house. They can't, you know, there's so many reasons not to do it for that. Or like, I think for me, so the choice was kind of made for me, to be honest. I didn't get in. And I think after a little, like, sure, I think I was very emotional. I'm hearing this question and I'm like, kind of brought back to that time where like, it was not a fun period in my life. Like nobody likes rejection. It's what I thought I wanted. But there are so many paths that I don't think were presented to me or not. I didn't even seek them out, you know, like there's a nursing shortage right now, everybody, like a massive, massive issue. And that is not beneath anybody, right? Like just because you have been told MD, PhD, like there's DOs, there's PAs, there's NPs, there's like literally any letter you want to throw after your last name, it's there for you if that's truly what you want. So I think kind of just being prepared to like ask yourself why you're doing it and what you want out of it. And then for me, then medical school kind of lost its allure after a little bit. By the time I had not gotten into medical school, so I moved back to Chicago for my now husband, who kind of did the traditional route. He did, and you know, friends of ours who had done the HPME program. So I think you do 3 years and then, you know, you go straight to med school. So I watched a lot of them go through that straight through, and I think it definitely, you start realizing kind of back to like what I was even saying about the job, like what you expect or like expectation versus reality, like it's just not fun for a lot of years. And maybe you ultimately get to where you want, or maybe at the end of that, you realize you don't. And, you know, Liz mentioned she has a lot of colleagues that now kind of consult which is also a great path and, you know, a reason to do it. But I think that there are many reasons to do it and there's also many reasons not to, and those are both okay. I think that you've been the top students probably throughout your entire life, and then you end up at Northwestern, and maybe some of you are still the top students, maybe some of you feel like you're not anymore. And I mean, you're still going to be graduating from a university that's the best in the world. And I think when you talk to your parents, you kind of lose sight of that because you become the kid again, but you have these skills that you've built, and it's ultimately about those and the skills to think for yourself, to know how to do the research. It's not about the actual research or like I don't know how many times I've memorized the Krebs cycle and still don't know it today, right? Like, it's not about that. You know how to buckle down and get it done. And I think that's what you take away. So yeah, how to talk to your parents. I think you have a plan, you know your options, and say, here are all the other things that I could do that I am also interested in. And like, please understand that this is like stressing me out, or it's just ultimately not what I want. And, you know, hopefully they treat you like with empathy and compassion.
Yeah, absolutely. Both really good pieces of advice, Liz and Amy. And Eugeas, I know you had turned your microphone off too. I'd love to pass it to you as well.
I mean, I just echo that. I had actually applied to med school and PhD programs kind of, and like Amy, I didn't get in. So obviously that decision was taken away from me. I even applied to DO programs, and I'll say this, I tell my kids, they're like, I'm going to be a neurosurgeon. I was like, okay, the one of like 5 in the country, and then you make $500,000, but you're in how many years of debt, and you don't start making positive income until you're like 50, right? Because of all that debt you're paying off. And I tell my kids that, and they're like, well, it's an easy way to get money. And I'm like, but life isn't easy, right? And so that's the thing, is like, we have to think about, and like they're saying, like, is it worth that debt? I mean, absolutely. If you have the passion, you want to do it, and you financially can make it work, by all means, pursue that. But like Amy said, there's so many other paths: nursing, PA, right? PA is like a 2-year program. Yeah, it's grad school, right? But obviously lower cost than an MD. But there's so many different pathways. There's certificates, there's technical degrees, things like that, that you can still stay in medicine and still do what you want. So I think it's really important for the students to know that. And also just to keep in mind, like, that conversation, I actually didn't talk to my parents. My dad's a computer engineer. He's very much like, you know, I've worked hard, you should be an engineer because that's where the money is. And not gonna lie, right? My sister, who is many years younger than me, her friends out of bachelor's, 6-figure salary because they're a computer engineer, right? And obviously that's a lucrative career. But if your heart's not there, don't do it, right? If you're going to medicine for the money, don't do it, right? That's the wrong, I mean, just in general, personal opinion, don't do it for the money, because that's not where your passion is going to be, right? I tell my students all the time, I took leave from biotech, right? I could have found another biotech job, probably making close to 6 figures at this point, you know, after, you know, having a degree from Northwestern and then, you know, being in the field, but I hated it. I was miserable. I mean, if you're going to have me pipette 12 hours a day, I'm going to get carpal tunnel, like not going to happen, right? Like, I'm not using my skills. I'm not using my background. So why would I be there, right? Obviously took a huge pay cut to go into teaching, totally different conversation about how we don't pay educators, but I think I mean, is it worth it? I don't know. We'll see, right? Because yes, I did take on that graduate degree loan because unlike a PhD, a doctorate of education is not paid for. I think like a JD or an MD, those are not paid for doctorates, right? But I did willingly take that on, knowing that, okay, I saved some money in my 20s, like Liz said, right? And I took out some loans to do this because I have a passion for it. So my thing is, do it because you're passionate about it. Don't do it because it looks cool to have an MD after your name.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so helpful, Eugeas, and like such great advice and insights to end our conversation on. I can't believe we've already reached the end of our hour together. And I do, you know, students who sent in questions that we didn't get to, I would really encourage you to reach out to our alumni. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of our questions, but I will share contact information, LinkedIn information. So please reach out with your questions. I'm sure that our alumni here would love to hear from you. So, you know, again, alumni, thank you so much for being here and sharing so many great insights. This was really interesting talking with you all and hearing more about your paths. And students, thank you for joining us. I will be sending out Grubhub credits to students who are on the call today, because normally we buy students lunch for our Waldron events and we can't do that right now. So you all keep an eye out for information about that from me. But we hope you all have a great rest of your day. And thanks again. Go Cats.